breaking news this morning. Number one, Elizabeth Warren is reportedly reassessing her campaign. But number two, Mike Bloomberg has suspended his campaign and endorsed Joe Biden.
Big news. So joining us now to break it down, Don Calloway is Democratic strategist, and Jonathan Easley, he's national political reporter for The Hill. Don, let's start with you. I mean, Michael Bloomberg out. He said from the beginning in a statement, he said, 3 months ago I entered this race because I didn't think anybody could win. I have now reassessed my campaign. I make decisions based on data. Yeah. The delegate math is not there for me. Suspending his race, and immediately has endorsed Joe Biden. I mean, the one thing is Biden always had that money problem, and that with Pete Buttigieg and Bloomberg behind him,
that's way over.
He's got more cash than God now.
That probably is done. So I was on a campaign, Deval Patrick's, and we came into the race virtually the same day as Michael Bloomberg.
And the same calculus.
The same calculus, which was 40% of the electorate is undecided. But I think what we did not calculate is they were undecided amongst the field. That doesn't mean there's room for a new entrant to be welcomed into this process. Now, we had a dramatic spending disparity of about 500 to 665 million to our 3 million or so. But I think that another difference is Mike Bloomberg could buy name recognition, but he didn't have the time to purchase being known by the American people. So he was extraordinarily vulnerable to attacks. He made that debate stage, and he was torpedoed on that debate stage, and that defined him, and it was over.
Certainly.
And let me say, it could have gone the other way. I mean, ultimately turned out Bloomberg, and it's not surprising, he's never been particularly strong debater. Everybody else had practice at this thing. He had to jump in, and he got decimated, really by Elizabeth Warren. But if Joe Biden had continued to show weakness, Bloomberg did get some votes and did get some delegates here. If Biden had stayed weak, had a middling performance in South Carolina, then this race does look very different, and Bloomberg's bet ultimately pays off.
Yeah, that's right. But it looks like South Carolina and Jim Clyburn really changed the entire contour of this race.
When the history book is written, it'll be that moment.
Absolutely. I mean, Biden went on to, a 30-point victory in South Carolina, and that was just it was the tipping point. I mean, the centrists consolidated around his campaign. He won unexpected victories last night in places that Bernie Sanders did well in 2016, Minnesota and Oklahoma, and it really just set him on the path to burn it up.
Yeah. So one thing, Don, Crystal's floated this, is that Bernie needs to change the game. Last night proved earned media is king, no matter how much organizing. Biden had one thing in the state of Virginia and won the place by 30 points, 40 points, something like that. To get earned media, he might have to convince Elizabeth Warren to come on board to try and get some of those suburban voters. Do you think that could actually work? A, would she do it? B, would it work?
Would she endorse Biden?
Endorse Bernie Sanders if he wants to eat into. Because look, his biggest vulnerability, suburban voters right now. That's what strategy has to be all in.
Yeah, I know that's the progressive dream, right? Is to get Biden and Bernie and Warren somehow together. But like I said a few days ago on the show, I think that Elizabeth Warren, liberal and progressive as she is an institutionalist in a way that I don't know that Bernie is. I don't know that Bernie's philosophical underpinnings are.
Yeah, I think that's an issue.
Such that I don't know that it's a perfect union like we might think.
Sure.
And we keep talking about Joe Biden not having the organization. Entirely true. He didn't have much beyond the South Carolina states, but he had 8 years of being the man next to the man.
Correct.
And you can't discount that name recognition and what that does to the psyche.
Right.
I think I underestimated that significantly.
And Jonathan, now, I mean, look, Bloomberg was racking up votes, and those were mostly coming from Joe Biden. With him now also throwing in for Joe Biden, you have a further coalescing, making it that much harder. I mean, when the delegates come out from Super Tuesday, it will still be relatively competitive in terms of the delegate count for Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. But with this amount of coalescing, this day of election swings that we saw, and now Bloomberg throwing in as well, the landscape just becomes that much tougher.
Biden looks very formidable right now. I mean, it's his support from black voters. He's going to do well in Mississippi, all across the South, like we saw last night, in Florida, where Bloomberg was running near the top of the polls. I mean, it almost looks like a 1-to-1 crossover vote between Bloomberg and Biden. A lot of that support is going to Biden.
Yeah.
Like we were talking, we don't know what's going to happen necessarily with Warren supporters if she does drop out. There is some tension on the left.
It's enough to make up the at that point. So I mean, the Super Tuesday results results, Bloomberg outperformed Elizabeth Warren, I think around 15, 20% of the vote, something like that in some key states, 12%, et cetera. That's almost all, like you said, that's 1-to-1 with Biden. I mean, that just makes it so that the delegate math is going to start getting very tricky for Bernie Sanders, John. I mean, I don't see how we can even amass a plurality going into the convention at this point relative to Biden when all of this is beginning to happen.
I was surprised even by how much of the support that Klobuchar and Buttigieg had that went directly to Biden.
Yeah.
It seems from the results last night. I mean,
it just went all the way there.
Yeah, we didn't know if that would happen. You know, voters are very strange in how they decide on who they want to support. Sometimes your second candidate doesn't necessarily line up with your first, but it seems like a lot of that support went to Biden, and that should continue with Bloomberg getting out of the race.
I mean, Don, the case that I've been making, look, I agree with everything that's been said here. The landscape is very difficult. But of course, the Bernie people are not going to give up, nor should they, right? Especially coming out of this. First of all, one thing we've learned is this thing can change on a dime, like nobody's business. Joe Biden is still Joe Biden. He has certain weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Let's be clear about that. There's a reason why there wasn't a coalescing around him from the jump. I think the best play is the vote that has been the shiftiest among these candidates has been the suburban vote. Right. I think you have to somehow make a play for that like normie suburban vote, which is not something that the Sanders campaign has really explicitly tried to do at this point and hasn't found an affinity there to that point. So that's why, look, I agree with you. I think it's not a great fit. Warren and Sanders, I'm the first to say that they're very different types of people, very different politicians. I don't know that she would do it at this point. My guess is she wouldn't.
Right.
But you need someone who can validate you with like normal people who just want to get rid of Donald Trump. And I don't know what other allies he could potentially have at this point.
Well, that is the existential question facing Bernie at this point, which is, has he maxed out his abilities based upon the way he's defined himself since he got into the national game in 2015? Has he maxed out the coalition that he can possibly build?
Yeah.
And you know, I think that he will probably win North Dakota, probably A, because it's North Dakota, B, because it's a caucus. But I don't see any other state which I definitively know on next Tuesday, mini Super Tuesday. I don't know another state that I can definitively say post-Biden surge that is going to Bernie.
Right.
And so the real question here is, I think Bernie Sanders has plateaued. That doesn't mean he should stop. That does mean he should proceed all the way to the convention because Biden could have a gaffe, another gaffe.
Right.
But I think that we have seen Bernie Sanders max himself out.
Well, let's hold that thought because I want to get into a little bit more of Biden and how that plays out moving forward, the states, et cetera, that are at play. So stick with us. We're going to talk about all of that right after this.